Good evening, this is What's Going On. I'm John Lee. Our guest this evening is Dirk Brazil, the new Davis City manager. Dirk, I want to thank you for being on our show.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
For sure.
Yeah.
So what we're going to do tonight, as usual, is the first half of the show is about how'd you get here, and the second half is about where are you going from here. So in the first half of the show, hopefully we'll get a better idea of who Dirk is and how he got to be who he has become. I actually found out about the Brazil family 40 years ago, and I told Dirk about this a long time ago, but 40 years ago I was working for the state legislature, and Dirk's dad was a reporter in Sacramento, and he was one of the people I hung out with. So I actually knew your father 40 years ago when you were a small boy. So 15 years ago, when you first came back to Davis, see, I'm filling in everything I know at the beginning so I can shut up. 15 years ago, Dirk and I had lunch, and I was talking to my friend Katie McGuire, and she said, oh, Dirk Brazil, his grandfather was a Superior Court judge in Monterey County. So I know that your dad was a reporter and your grandfather was a judge. And then you said, does Katie McGuire have a bunch of brothers? And I said, yeah, 4 of them. And it turned out that you hung out and grew up with one of her 4 brothers. So, so I know you grew up in Salinas. So that's my introduction. How did you get here? Where did you grew up in Salinas?
Right.
How'd you get to Davis, and what have you been doing since?
Fairly circuitous route. I actually, when I left Salinas, I actually started out at Sac State. I was not exactly the overachiever in high school, and I had a very few options when it came to choosing a college. And Sacramento was just, in fact, I'd never even seen the college until I showed up there on my first day. And I went there for my first 2 years in the semester system and realized that if I was ever going to be successful in academics, I needed to get into a tighter schedule than a 16-week semester system, and started checking out a few UC campuses, Berkeley and Davis in particular. Chose Davis, just I like the feel of it, and everything just clicked for me. I got into a much tighter schedule, fell just deeply into political science and public policy and those sorts of things, and started using more of my natural talents of sort of writing and speaking, and sort of off I went. So it was a really good move. And then, like a lot of folks, I went away for a while, did the internships. Worked in right after that I actually became a Coro Fellow, which is a program I did in San Francisco that fairly select people in the United States, and it's a year-long internships or series of internships, generally with nonprofits, corporations, labor unions, where you sort of get a taste of different sorts of public life.
It's a really good program.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun for me.
Vic Fazio was in it.
That's right. Vic was on my recommendations.
Gary Sandy.
Right.
Well, there have been a lot of good Coro Foundation fellows that have emerged.
Right. And it sort of set me on this path of public service and government and just sort of the diversity and sort of really getting into the sort of visceral aspects of cities and government and just, you know, kind of, I mean, I think it was my natural inclination, but it really opened up my eyes to a lot of opportunity. I then made sort of the next natural place. I got a graduate degree from Claremont Graduate School that was affiliated with the Coro program. So sort of went through an expedited process there, and took a few years, but wrote a master's thesis. And so I have a master's in public policy from Claremont Graduate School. Then I went to work for an assembly member by the name of Richard Katz, who represented the San Fernando Valley, very close confidant with Speaker Willie Brown. And worked for Richard for a while in Los Angeles as his press secretary. Sort of invented myself as a press secretary, PR person, and cut my teeth doing that in Los Angeles, which was a fairly rigorous test.
He was fairly active assembly member, so he probably kept you busy.
Very busy, very busy. But then came back. My now wife, then girlfriend Nora, was living in Sacramento and was working, excuse me, on her teaching credential. Decided Sacramento was the place for me, and came back here and just did various odds and ends. Worked as the recruiter and the administrator for USC's School of Public Administration in Sacramento, and did that for a couple of years, and just various and sundry things. I'm trying to think of then what the progression.
Somehow you got to Oregon.
That's much later. Actually, it was Washington State.
I'll be patient.
Yes. What you'll find is I have before. Well, I changed a lot. I did a lot of jobs, always sort of onward and upward, but always very diverse. I went to work for my first job in the legislature was for Willie Brown. I went to work for a gentleman by the name of Michael Galizio, who became Willie Brown's chief of staff and was revamping the caucus operation into a much more elaborate member services, media-driven operation. It was big, and I became, at a very young age, head of what was known as member services. What that was really is a euphemism to take care of those members that were in marginal districts that Willie Brown needed to stay at 41 votes to stay speaker. But rather than the old days where they would just be purely baldly political operations, largely on state time, although people would take time off to run campaigns, ours was done largely through helping them with their legislative portfolio, helping them with their district office operations, things that as freshmen or as, maybe not the most able politicians in the world, they really needed help doing. So it was a very professional approach to this, which I really appreciated. So it was my first real experience in management. It was lots of travel up and down the state. Got to work up close and personal with someone like Willie Brown, which is, sort of life-altering from a professional way. I mean, there's no one else like him.
He's bigger than life.
Oh, he's incredible.
Yeah.
What a talent. And to this day, I mean, it's while I was on the periphery and not necessarily in his inner cabinet, I just learned so much, and it was just a great perch for me to learn a lot of things and to figure out a lot of things as well. I then left the speaker. The campaign life got a little bit old. I did spend an awful lot of time down in Downey and Cerritos on one particular campaign, and that was about all I needed to do, and sort of hightailed it back to Sacramento. And then I had a series of legislative jobs, one for an individual named Sam Farr, who represents the Central Coast, heir apparent to Leon Panetta, now in Congress doing that. Great guy, and worked a lot of sort of environmental issues and things for him. And then I went to work for Mike Roos. At the time was the pro tem and was his policy director, right about where he was doing the whole assault weapons ban legislation.
Okay.
And sort of was really in the thick of things in the Capitol when that was a very big deal. I have to recall this going back, and then I'm thinking after Mike Roos. Trying to think of the progression of the events. When Gray Davis, ultimately I ended up in the Davis administration. Starting out, I was, when Gray Davis was controller in his last year, I was his policy director and worked on his UC Regents, CSU trustees, and State Lands Commission. I mean, that's really what the controller, those are his main bailiwick.
Right.
And then after controller, I was with him for his first 2 years as lieutenant governor, again as his policy director in the Capitol. And then a friend of mine, a gentleman by the name of Bern Shanks, got named to be head of Fish and Wildlife in the state of Washington, in Olympia. And he called me out of the blue one night and said, "Have I got an offer for you? I'm looking for, a chief deputy. I think you'd be great." Hung up the phone, talked it over with my wife, Nora. We had a son, Jack, who was 7 at the time, and Lucy, who was 2. And we said, sure, why not? And we packed up everything and moved to Washington State and did that for about 2 years. With the mission really to restore wild salmon writ large. We were a very environmentally progressive administration that got very controversial very quickly. And pretty soon we had the tribes, we had the timber industry, we had the real estate industry, we had just about everybody mad at us, to where commission meetings were ending with protesters outside calling for our ouster. And I finally decided that it was best to come back to California, to a political world that I understand and was probably better suited for. And then that's when I ended up back. Gray Davis was governor at the time, and I segued into the California Department of Fish and Game as their chief deputy under Bob Hite, and stayed with him through the recall. When that happened, or when that was imminent, I was now a Davis resident, by the way. When we came back from Washington, we moved to Davis.
Sure.
And so when I came back, I got connected with sort of the local political establishment, et cetera. And I had known Craig Reynolds, who was Lois's chief of staff at the time, and just a good, solid relationship there. And so when the recall happened, it just so happened that Lois had a vacancy as her former district director. And I took that job and did the commute from Davis to Vacaville, and discovered Solano County and parts of Yolo County I didn't know much about, and did that for about 3 years. And then got a call out of the blue from the county, where their assistant county administrator position had come vacant, and asked if I was interested in the job, and I pursued that, and was at the county for the last 8 years, and loved it. Absolutely great. My first real foray into local government, and then ended up here at the city.
So talk about that job. Talk about the job you had with the county.
It was interesting. Back then, Yolo County is largely a rural county, and the county position is very unique in that we have 205,000 people in this county, but only 20,000 people live in the unincorporated area. So much of what it is the county does involves these direct relationships with the cities, and formal and informal agreements on how we got and how we're going to operate and work with each other. A lot of that is driven by the general plan, both by the cities and by the county, which basically says all the growth is, for the most part, will be directed to the cities, and therefore 90% of the county stays open space and agriculture. That is our culture, that's what we do. But by doing so, the county has taken a vow of poverty. We don't have a large tax base. We don't have auto malls. We don't have all these sorts of things. And if you drive through the county, that's what makes it wonderful. That's what makes it different. But it sort of allowed me to develop good relationships with the city, sort of develop this really, I think, very strong ethic in believing that's exactly how this county should be constructed. Believe in sort of a city's right to do what a city wants to do within reason, but understand the county perspective, right? So a lot of what I did was, I guess you'd call it sort of intergovernmental relations, or just things that were just intergovernmental. I mean, so much of what we did at the county, it's, the clients for the county are the AIDS, the blind, the disabled, the criminal, the mentally ill. Those are the services that we provide, and we provide them to the residents of the city. So much of that was really just the interaction on those issues, not so much in the minutiae and the policy. We have professional people to do that. But just sort of writ large, how are we going to provide the service? What is your need? We're providing it for West Sac. Why can't we do it in Winters? All the 2x2 relationships, all that sort of stuff. That was it. I mean, it was a real world. But even back then, it was also sort of the evolution of a local government from where everything was paper-based to where we were moving to paperless, right? Where you're moving from just really sort of like the old fax machine sorts of things to just technology and social media. So there was just how do you communicate with people and all these new tools. I mean, that's, within the last 2 years, or 10 years, I should say, that's all fairly new, particularly in government. And so there's by the time I left, there was just a lot of really great stuff in place, and I would argue still is, where the county is just really humming along. And part of the reason that attracted me to coming to Davis was, the county stuff was pretty well fixed. There's really good people there doing really good things. I was up for a new challenge, and it was sort of time to move on. That was it. I mean, there were some big issues that came along that I was involved in, and a lot of things across the river in my experience with the legislature and our legislative caucus in particular. So I spent a lot of time doing that. Sort of discovering sort of the idea of regional governance with SACOG, because that is the way we do things now. I mean, you can't be a standalone entity. You cannot just be in a silo. You got to learn how to operate regionally. And we have a COG, a Council of Governments, called SACOG, which involves the 6 counties, including Yolo. And I forget how many cities are involved, but including the city of Davis.
34 or 40?
Yeah, it's big. It's big. Don Saylor, former council member, now Board of Supervisors member, is this chair. And so that relationship still exists with a very professional staff. All transportation dollars from the state and federal government flow through this COG. But, that's just really sort of a sidebar.
Well, except it's not. The Council of Government is the structure that the federal system tried to impose on each of the states to have some kind of uniformity and consistency.
Sure.
ABAG, the Association of Bay Area Governments, was probably started in the 20s, but SACOG, I think, was started in the 60s, and at that point it was being used in a wide variety of federal programs. I was involved in health planning, and in 1977, no, it had to be 76 because Ford signed it. The public, yeah, this is supposed to rattle off my tongue like nobody's business. The public health resources, and no, I'm getting that and CEQA mixed up. I'm so embarrassed. I'm going to try it. Public Law 93-641.
Okay.
Anyway, the point is, every state had to divide up into health planning regions, and our region is called Golden Empire.
Oh, okay.
And it was almost the same as SACOG. It wasn't exactly the same, but any health planning materials had to go through that process, and then the Reagan administration killed it. The Ford administration started it. The Carter administration implemented it, and then the Reagan administration just shut down a lot of Democrat local government kind of initiative kind of things. Anyway, I was going to ask you a question about explaining what SACOG is, and we sort of answered you answered it enough that I just started talking.
Well, you gave me the historical perspective, which I have not. I mean, I met it in its most mature fashion, you know, and I find them to be very helpful, and they play a very key role, and it just sort of is a model, I think. Not a model, but just speaks to the, you know, you can't go it alone anymore, and it helps and strengthens the numbers, particularly when you're talking about Washington, D.C.
The COG, and this is a good segue to what you were doing last week, the COG used to have great power. Now the only thing it has power on is transportation financing. And that's what you referred to. So, for example, Woodland has been pushing for a long time on improvements between the two freeways exchanging. Right. For 10 years, that was #1 on Yolo County's priority list because it was so much money.
Right.
But that meant that other things that needed to be done, like the bike lane between Davis and Woodland, got deferred until such time as the money was there for the big interchange.
Right.
Every county competes for that at the state level, and that's what the COG has jurisdiction over at this point. So they keep the state priority list for the Sacramento region, and you have to get through that. It used to be there was a lot more of that kind of jurisdictional control at the regional level. And I think that was really confusing and complicated.
Yeah.
So talk about your kids.
Yeah, we have son Jack, is 25, lives in Eugene, proud graduate of the University of Oregon, and just a great kid, you know, sort of finding his way. He works for a financial institution up there, sort of at the beginning rungs, and is having a great time. And just got engaged to his longtime girlfriend. So we have a wedding in our future, which we're excited about. Our daughter Lucy is just finishing her second year at a small college in the Midwest, sort of weathering literally the weather of the Midwest, and definitely making up her mind that that's not where she wants to make her home. But she's taken off like a rocket. She's going to intern in a congressional office in D.C. for the summer, and then study abroad in the fall in Copenhagen. So they're doing great. They're wonderful kids.
So what's the school that she's going to?
College of Worcester. It's a small liberal arts, about an hour south of Cleveland. Sits sort of on the northern edge of the large Amish community that is in the middle of Ohio.
Wow.
And it's just got everything she wants.
Ohio's a lot like Yolo County. Most of it's rural.
A lot of rolling hills, lots of corn. We have a much more diversified agricultural portfolio, I would argue. But yeah, it's beautiful in its own ways. And there's you know, I mean, she's just learning a lot about the world and doing really well.
My dad grew up in South Ohio, so I have some idea.
Okay, yeah.
Not much of an agricultural portfolio.
Right.
Corn and soybeans and some chickens.
Yeah.
Not much else.
Yeah, no, that's very true, and it's, you know, it gives you a real glimpse on what the recession was like in places outside of California. And you think we had it bad, they still have it bad, and just, you know, whole communities like Worcester, where Rubbermaid was their big father plant, the plant closed, you know, I don't know how many years ago, and you know, there are about 25,000 people, and they've just been trying to recover ever since. And when a business opens and it has 10 employees, that's a big deal. And you just really take for granted how much better we have it here, if you ask me, sort of economically, and just how diverse we are, and just culturally, and just what's going on. It's for her, I think it's great. It's just a real slice of the part of the world that you know, most people don't get to see, and she's going to live it for 4 years, which is great. Yeah.
I may have done a report on Worcester. I'll check and see
Okay.
if I did a report on 60 schools around the country.
Oh, okay.
Calvin, some really good schools in Ohio and Michigan.
Yeah.
There are a lot of good schools around.
Worcester got big. It's in the Colleges That Matters book. I mean, it's in the small one. So I mean, it is on people's radar screen, and there's usually every year Davis High sends a kid or two there, and but it's just, you know, it's just one of those idyllic small 2,000 student liberal arts colleges that, you know, are wonderful. Yeah.
Denison.
Right.
I mean, there's
right.
They're the kind of school that Davis tries to create, UCD tries to create that kind of atmosphere with 25 or 30,000 students. But if you only have 4,000 or 5,000 students in the student body, and they're committed to undergraduate education, and they're the only school in town,
right?
Those things add up to a kind of cultural experience that you don't get at Berkeley.
Right.
And Davis tries to have both the Berkeley experience and the Worcester experience at the same time.
Right.
So I'm tempted to talk about Washington, D.C., but we should talk about that last as opposed to first. So you've been in office 6 months as city manager. So talk about that for a while, and then we can talk about the report that just came out that I want to talk about.
Well, it's hard to believe it's been 6 months. I mean, it's gone pretty quickly. It's been all consuming, you know. It's, I mean, I was under no illusions when I took the job, sort of that it would be a demanding job, having lived here for 15 plus years and being a fan of local government and sort of and active in local government and watching what's going on here. I mean, I understood what I was getting into, but I did underestimate, you know, sort of the amount of organizational development work and workforce development work that's been needed. The policy stuff, that's been very clear. The personalities of the council, really pleased with that. Wide open book. You know, I understand that we're on television on Tuesday nights. You know, a steep learning curve when it comes to city versus county. All that I understood, but I really was not prepared for walking into, you know, a situation where there just was a lot of work that needed to be done, and John alluded to that. We didn't have evaluations, a lot of people doing jobs that didn't, you know, the right people, right place sort of things, the way things were structured, people's assessment of how they felt about their job and what they were doing, just the overall needs, you know, that was all quite a surprise. So it's been a steep learning curve in a lot of ways, but I feel really good at 6 months, and I'll feel, I think, really good at 6 months from now at a year, where we've gone through a budget and we've gone through labor negotiations and sort of looking back at that, sort of what did I learn? What do people think of me? Did we succeed? What do we have to build on from there? But I think so far, my focus has really been on being visible, to being a very good communicator, not only with the council, but just be open and honest with them in a very public way, but just with the employees. I mean, I spent my first, well, let's call it month, just going around and meeting with anybody who wanted to meet, whether they be the firefighters, whether it be the Planning Public Works Department, and I would sit down and I would just talk and I would listen. And to this day, that's, I think, really, really helped me in my first 6 months. So it's been great, you know, but it's been a lot of work. I'm tired, that's for sure. But I find the reasons to be rejuvenated on a daily basis.
Your hair may not be turning gray yet. It looks like you're not in the same place as John Meyer is. His hair's turning gray.
Yes.
So so here's where I'm going to say what I have to say. I read the report yesterday, and to me, the overwhelming theme of the report is the confused relationship between the city staff and the city council, and that's city council members' individual faults. In trying to figure out what I'm trying to say, the closest I can come is the city manager needs to be the dad. The city manager needs to be the one that says, 5 years from now, I'm going to be living with this decision whether you're here or not, and I'm going to have to make the right decision. And I think for too much of the last 15 years, we haven't had somebody in the city manager's office that had that kind of attitude. So John Meyer was city manager from 1990 to 2000. Then Jeannie Hippler was interim. Then Jim Antonin was city manager for 5 years. And I think he was only the granddad. I don't think he was ever the dad. He just wanted to get his CalPERS retirement. And it was a very bad 5 years. Then Emlyn replaced him. And I thought Emlyn did a great job. But Sue Greenwald, particularly when she was mayor and after she was mayor, was abusive to city staff. And Meyer refers to it in his report. City staff had a very difficult time during that period, and nobody could control Sue, ever. And she had nobody's respect. Nobody respected her, and she didn't respect anybody. So that created a very traumatic relationship between staff and the council. Then Joe Cravoza was elected, and when Joe Cravoza was mayor, he thought he was a strong mayor. He did everything he could. At that point, Navazio had become the city manager, and I think Navazio did a great job with the city and is doing a great job with the city of Woodland. But frankly, Cravoza did everything he could to embarrass Navazio behind the scenes so that Navazio knew that he would not be the city manager for long. And the whole point of the city manager process was for Cravoza to hire his own person to be the city manager. He hired Pinkerton. Pinkerton may very well have been a decent city manager. I don't know. The one conversation I had with him, he did all the talking. The experience that I've had and what I've been told is that Pinkerton gets along really well with the city council, and he doesn't get along at all with staff. And that meant that during the 3 years that he was the city manager, it was explosive what was going on in City Hall, and it blew up every day. And it was city staff that had to deal with it, and it was Pinkerton's decisions, and it was Cravoza's decisions. And we had a very bad relationship between the city staff and the city council at that point. Cravoza tried to be the city council all by himself. He repeatedly ordered people to do things, and they would say, including the city manager would say, if you have 3 votes from the city council, I'll be happy to do that. But Cravoza thought that it was his right to be, as the mayor, to order city staff around. And we've had a very awkward 4 years because of that. The city council now, I think, are wonderful people. They're collegial. They can get along. They don't agree. They have a lot to talk about. But you walked into a disaster area. You walked into Germany in 1945. You walked into a very devastated situation. One of the things in the report, and I'll end here, one of the things in the report is to acknowledge the deputy city manager. Kelly Stakowicz has done an incredible job during the 7 or 8 years she's been working for the city, and has been an enormous amount of stability during a great deal of chaos in the city management. So the report is an elegant job. He spent a lot of time talking with staff. Staff had a lot to say, and I agree with what staff had to say. So with that, there are many things in the report. I'd like to have you talk about that, but it's your agenda. Talk about what issues you think are important, and just go down your checklist.
Well, I mean, first of all, when you talk about the John Meyer report, I mean, you know, there's as you come in as a new city manager, you know, there's a lot to do. There's a lot to figure out. Everybody is lined up and wanting to talk to you. You don't know who is who. There are people that have been here for a long time. You don't know people's learning styles. They don't know yours. And it's just a really, really busy, exciting, but also very confusing time. You look at a lot of documents. You don't understand because it's not done in a format you're used to. Someone's speaking to you in a shorthand. Wait, I'm not quite sure I understand. You look at your calendar and you see, when I start my week, I have at least 12 meetings that are set on my, you know, it's like you inherit this sort of stuff and you have to really work through this thing, but you've got to get to know everybody. You have to work. And John and I were having conversations. He is a former city manager and someone that I have a lot of respect for. It's sort of like, you know, about just doing the job, and in Davis in particular. And I kept sort of half jokingly but half seriously saying, I could really use your help. What is it you want to do? I'll put you on contract. This actually started when I was at the county. When he retired from the university, I was probably the first one to call him and say, what is it you want to do? Because I respect him that much. We at the county would love to bring you on to do something. He was enjoying his early retirement then. So we sort of continued that conversation. And this is something that he really wanted to do, because he did feel, I think, that since he was city manager until the present time and I had accepted the job, that there had been a serious drift in terms of what he thought, how things should be done and how they should be operating. And he would hear from people on a regular basis what their personal situation was and what they thought of the organization. So I really just gave him free rein. I mean, it was pro bono. It cost me nothing to sort of get this very free insider. I would at this point, at that point, and even now, I would not be able to go in and have the candid conversations and get the candid responses back from the people that he was able to. So I think that he was able to get to a depth that I don't know if an outside consultant. It was just he's just a really unique individual with a really unique set of skills that was perfect for this job. So that being said, I mean, what he really said about it, it's just all about sort of how should we be delivering customer service? How do we, help staff feel good about the job that they're doing? And I mean, it really is those two things. And then if you look at all of his recommendations, most of which, or the bulk of which, I say the important ones in terms of visibility of the city manager, staff morale, trying to think of what off the top of my head. I mean, a lot of those I've already begun. I mean, I inherited a situation, nobody knows for sure, but there's been no evaluations of senior staff or of any staff. Some people say 5 years, some people say 8 years. So we've done the first round of evaluations. And people are really appreciative of that. And it's starting to trickle down through the organization. I've now given them a tool. And we do what's known as a 360-degree evaluation. So it's the person above you, it's your peers, as well as your direct reports. And I sat down and I've had 13 evaluations of people that I've done over the last 2 weeks. And they've been great and really well received. But it's just sort of setting that tone of expectations, of deliverables, of what is it that you do, why is it that you do it, and I hope I do it in such a way that it is collaborative. I mean, if you've known, I've not cleaned house. I've not, it's not like I've gone in there and fired everybody and hired new people. It's like, no, there is a lot of really good talent that is just, I think, that have been, if they've been there for 15 years, they've been through 7 city managers, interim or other, and regardless of who that individual was, if you're someone in the middle of the organization, chances are you've just been lost. You're just drifting because the person above you, the plans keep changing, it's unclear. And then if you overlay on top of that, just the tough economies and the decisions that had to be made in terms of budget cuts and consolidations and what have you, I mean, it had to be just a really confusing time if you're a John Q. Davis City employee. I mean, I'm just going out there and I'm supposed to lay, 3 miles of asphalt, right, and stripe it, and all this stuff is swirling around me. I mean, that must be really hard. So I spent a lot of the first part of my couple months just listening to people and talking to people and getting a sense of where they are and just really absorbing a lot of this anxiety, anger, confusion, and I'm not saying we've turned the corner, but I think a lot of that is changing. I think people are starting to feel a little more optimistic. They're feeling good about, it looks like things are going to be stable. They see a good relationship between me and the city council. Again, it comes back to what I said earlier, sort of this really open and transparent communication, and one of the things I'm really trying to break through is it seems to be out there in the general world that if it doesn't happen on Tuesday night, it's not happening. And there is so much going on in the city that we need to communicate, that people do day to day. I started a weekly communication where all department heads give to me what they've done during the week, which is really cool, which I then send out to all department heads and to the council and encourage them to share. And it's department by department, and it runs 8 to 10 pages. Planning and Public Works puts up pictures, designs of a proposed plan for something. And it's just been this epiphany for other departments to say, wow, we're doing a lot. Well, nobody knew that before. Nobody communicated it. Just little things like that seem to be just really helpful in terms of letting people know that they're part of a larger organization. What they're working on means something, that actually they want. I mean, somebody wants to hear that I just replaced the irrigation system in, Park X. Wow.
When you add up the list, it becomes a much bigger list.
Right.
When you look at it as an isolated event, it's just one more thing to do. But when you have 4 or 5 of those, it adds up to a lot. And that's what the city has to do to maintain.
Right.
I mean, if you aren't doing that every week, then the sewer's going to fall apart. The lawns aren't going to be watered when they're supposed to be. And I mean, stuff has to be maintained.
We just have people doing stuff every day, just coming in and doing their job, and whether it's, just processing permits at the counter, being a lifeguard at one of our pools, dealing with parents that are, signing up before dawn for Camp Puda and are not happy how things are working out for them. I mean, people really just don't, I don't think the average citizen understands what a life of public service really means, And if you're the person out there replacing those sprinkler heads in the park, how much interaction you have with the public. And it's not always positive, right? So how do you create that space for that employee to want to continue to come to work, to feel good about the job they're doing? That's what this is all about. And so we're sort of, I think, trying to rebuild that, kind of that culture, right? And getting people to be, that this is a place that they want to work.
So how many Davis employees are there now?
We're over 300. I think we're about 325. It's down from probably over 400. But then you get into a lot more part-time work in the summer that we do because of our camps and because of the lifeguards and a lot of the summer stuff that we offer. And obviously it's been a time of cutbacks. I'm approaching this year's budget as more of a transitional budget. I wouldn't expect, there's not a lot of big hiring, there's not a lot of big spending, but it's also not a lot of big takebacks and not a lot of whacks at the budget either. We're just going to kind of, status quo, which for some people is not all that great, but we're gonna just take some small steps in this budget and then sort of see where we are as the year moves on. But I'm very optimistic in the way things are trending in terms of just property tax and sales tax, which is our principal forms of revenue. And I just daily I get signs from people that they're feeling better about where things are going and the direction we're going, and both inside and outside government. I mean, I just not that people were. I was getting, nothing but negative comments when I first rolled in, but it's the scales are definitely tilting towards a much more positive atmosphere.
So talk about economic development and innovation.
I mean, I think that there is a lot going on, obviously, but with the innovation parks in particular.
So
in those discussions.
talk about those specific. I mean, get specific. You've got time.
Well, I guess but I was going to make the general point is that Davis for a long time sort of plugged along doing sort of economic development within our confines, which is, what is that? It's building up our downtown. It's smaller shopping centers. It's sort of encouraging those sorts of things. But then, with the recession, I think the world really changed, and everybody realized, Davis world economically realized that we needed to do a lot more if we were going to continue to provide the services that people in Davis had come accustomed to. And how do you do that? You need to raise more revenue. And as I said, we have 2 principal sources of revenue, which is property tax and sales tax. There's not much more we can do besides that. Well, how do you do that in a reasonable, responsible way? And that's what we're trying to do. So what we have on the table right now are 3, let's call them 3 innovation parks. One is Nishi, which is between I-80 and the university, which is the smallest of the 3. We have one that's proposed for the Mace Curve, which is the Ramos interest and other partners. And then we have what's known as the Davis Innovation Center, which is up on the northwest, up by the hospital. And that's it. In total, it's about 7 million square feet. And we are going through the public process that ultimately has to go, 1, to a vote of the council, and 2, has to go to a Measure R vote, which is a vote of the public. So right now we're in the public outreach phase. It's more the developers, but we obviously are facilitating a lot of that discussion with city staff. and talking about what something like that, how many there should be, how big they should be, should they include housing, what should they be zero net energy, how big is their footprint, do you put all three on the same ballot, do you have a special election, are they going to fall by the wayside? We're sort of at this point now where each of them is going through their own EIR process that is requiring a lot of studies in terms of transportation needs, infrastructure needs, air quality. And there's this thought that as we start seeing these, the size and the scope of these developments are going to go through a much finer sieve as we talk about what they would look like. And not just on the city's part in terms of what it is we'd be tolerating and the electorate would want to tolerate. For us, also having to include the county in these, because people have to remember these are annexations of agricultural land, which will involve the county and will involve LAFCO and involve our tax sharing agreement with those entities, getting back to that whole regional approach that we have to have, right? So right now, I mean, the city, while we understand that economic development and these could be a key part of it, we're sort of straddling that cheerleading versus let's make sure we take care of the basics before we embrace one of these projects, right? So we're sort of going back and forth on that spectrum, the staff that's working on this. But the part that's probably lost to the public eye is that these sort of came forward through what was known as an RFEI, a request for expression of interest. And before you knew it, we had, in the two innovation parks, 6 million square feet of potential development and annexation, and all of that entails put on our planning and public works and our overall government structure, which, if you've lived in Davis for any length of time, when have we ever dealt with anything of that size or that magnitude, both politically and just structurally? Right. So you're talking about just blowing apart the operations of our public works, the city manager's office, the planning department, where you're starting to process documents and deal with acreages and square footage we've never seen before. I think 6 months into it, actually it's been longer than that, it's probably been a year, it started before I got here, we're starting to get our legs underneath us. I think we're starting to have better communication with the community about what these would look like. I think as the study information starts coming back, the developers get a better sense of what might be doable. But we're sort of always walking that fine edge between being just a pure advocate for the program, I mean, for the development, and what is not caring what's in it, just we need something because it's going to be revenue, versus, okay, if we're going to be developing and it's going to be this big, what's it going to look like and how is it going to fit with Davis and what it is we do. Can't minimize the role of the university in this, can't minimize the competition that we have to realize that exists with our regional partners and what it is we're trying to do. So in all the meantime, you're sort of juggling all that development on the periphery, or the discussion of that development, with how do we keep a vibrant downtown and how do we deal with the whole subject of infill and that sort of economic development. Because you can't forget about keeping Davis Davis, right? And then the third leg is the relationship with the university and all that they contribute, and sort of keeping what spins out of that university in our community. And so we're sort of juggling all of this stuff, which I would argue is maybe not more balls, but certainly a lot larger ones than we've ever had to juggle in the past, just because the square footage, the dollar amounts, the competitiveness that's out there in the field. And sort of just operating in that world is very different for Davis, because we haven't played in that world much in the past. So, I mean, long answer, but that really is it. We're figuring it out. We're babes in the woods when it comes to this sort of thing.
What John Myers said in his report was, in economic development, Davis should double down compared to what we're doing now.
Right.
So that was my opportunity to try and get you to talk as much as you could about what we don't talk about enough in Davis. In most other cities, the main thing the city council talks about is economic development.
Right.
And I mean, just for example, Sacramento or West Sacramento or Elk Grove or just about any other city I can think of. So,
right.
I mean, Davis, we have more things on the plate coming in the door than most people have, most cities have when they get done. So
Right.
we have all these extraneous issues that turn out to be important.
I think the thing that gets lost in the discussion, or it has been, I think, as we pursue these larger projects or interact with these people, what we're doing, and the university and things, is there is so much activity going on right now in Davis that's related to economic development. You know, just as I said, sort of on the daily basis, everything that we do, whether it's a discussion about, you know, better broadband in the city and working on that, whether it's the relocation of the rail line, which could open up a lot of opportunity, these individual development projects that you're seeing that are being proposed, you know, in the downtown area, are just tremendous small projects, but things that we have not seen for a while. You've got the whole Hallmark Inn project that's coming in. That will be huge, not only for the city, but for the university that needs the conference space. We see a lot of activity with people coming to us now about wanting to do hotel projects and things in some of our vacant parcels that are around. We haven't seen this stuff in a decade. And so while we focus on these larger issues and putting these, you know, these big economic development projects in place perhaps, you know, let's keep our eye on the ball. There's Child's Ranch, which is about 800 homes that are talking about being developed. We've got Grande that's being developed. We have Cannery that's being brought online. This is a lot that is going on. And we have other smaller projects of 15 to 20 units that the developers are blowing the dust off, that are infill projects that they're beginning to slowly approach our planning staff and our public works staff about looking at this project again, wanting to revisit that. Now I think is the time. Are these plans still relevant? How we want to deal with parking? Just lots of interesting things. A lot of real estate changing hands for some potential development that's going on. And we're looking at it all through the lens of development that is right for Davis. You know, we're not talking 10-story office towers. We're talking, you know, lots of energy aspects to it, lots of underground parking. You know, just those days of that kind of development just doesn't fly anymore. So I mean, the conversation, while we can get lost about these bigger projects, which are sucking up a huge amount of our time and resources, and we want to do them right. So, and if one succeeds, great, let's get that on the ballot in 2016. But in the meantime, we're also really trying to keep a focus on, you know, sort of these wonderful projects that are really kind of keeping us afloat in the meantime.
So planning and public works was combined in one of Pinkerton's moves. And John Meyer recommends that that be undone. The ancient history is that when John was city manager, the person he trusted the most was Jeannie Hippler. So he put things like building maintenance and janitorial service with community services rather than public works. So in 2000, community development or community services was one of the biggest departments in the city, and public works was also a big department, but it wasn't as big as it is in other cities. Jeannie told me that when John was city manager, he would say to somebody, "That's a great idea, now just go down and get Jeannie's permission and then you can do it." And you'd go down to Jeannie's office and say, "John Meyer said yes, the city manager said yes." And then Jeannie says, "That's the stupidest idea I've ever heard. If you come in talking about that, I'm going to throw you out of my office." Well, that was John Meyer's safety valve. He knew that Jeannie was going to say that. So when she got to be the city manager, she didn't have that kind of backup support to, you know, let her be the white hat so somebody else could be the black hat. But the point is, community services had a whole bunch of things in it. Then community services somehow got reorganized. And there's a whole bunch of confusion now between planning, community development, and public works and community services. And that seems like a big mess.
A lot of it has to do with, yeah, I mean, I guess the only thing I'd throw out at the beginning of that is that, you know, is everything that we're talking about. You know, it's taken us a long time to get to the position where we are, and a lot of moving parts, and it's going to take us a while to sort of unravel them, you know, and to sort of get back to that finely braided, wonderfully functioning city. A lot of it has to do with, in the scenario and the situation you're talking about, has a lot to do with geography and just scattered in various places around in different buildings and places where I think some of the collaboration, and while the intent behind some of these would have worked or could work and still does work, but probably not as efficiently or as smoothly as it could just because of communication issues. So that's what we're working on. A lot of what, I mean, and a lot of what John talks about in his report is sort of, is City Hall being more outwardly focused and more community oriented and having people in there. Right, and what's happened is my predecessors, plural, over time what's happened is a lot of the people in City Hall in particular don't really have any interaction with the public. But they were brought there for specific purposes, that they followed a department head who did, or certain things. And I'm just saying, things have just been cobbled together over time. And then when you consolidate departments and you have, like when you get rid of a parks director and the parks department is now reporting to the human resources director, well, that person's position is in City Hall because that's where all HR is and that's where it runs the city. So all of a sudden you have parks people that are spread out in different people, but their department head is actually in City Hall. So the reporting structures just get all mucked up. And just imagine that, just crossing over from different departments. It's not just HR and parks. So the idea of sort of just, first you got to get in there and you have to have those conversations and figure out who is where and who is doing what. And wow, that doesn't make sense. And give me a drawing of how you think that this operates. That's the sort of thing that John started to look at, you know, put a spotlight on, but it's sort of left to me and department heads to say, okay, guys, let's sit down and let's talk about what makes sense. And part of it begins with sort of moving people up, in some cases, or out of City Hall. Part of it driven by trying to have some cost savings, or in some buildings where it's going to cost us some rent. We need to move people. But that gives us opportunity, you know? I mean, our internal computer functions do not have to be in City Hall. They can be down in one of our 5th Street, right? We have a lot of our public work engineers. They have a role, but their role is probably better performed with their public works on the ground staff out at our courtyard on 5th Street. So we're working through all of that, and we'll get there at some point. The first step we're doing is we're moving the city manager's office back to the middle of City Hall and moving other people that don't interact with the public as much back where the current city manager, where my office is right now. So in a week's time, next Thursday, you will find me sitting in the middle of City Hall with doors open and a much
more accessible.
Much more accessible.
Much more accessible. Like possible.
Right. But it also, I mean, the whole accessibility issue too, it does help that I've lived here for 15 plus years. And, you know, people see me at the farmer's market. They see me at the local market. They see me at the gym. They see me on the golf course. People are not shy about coming up and talking to me. But I do just have to say, for the record, people have been really, really respectful and cool and very, it's really rare that I'll have someone just really get in my face and say, you know, God damn it, this thing has to be fixed.
Then you're not well enough known yet.
Right.
It'll come.
But it's,
it'll come.
No, it's very much a honeymoon still, and I understand that. But, you know, that has been, I think, a really good part of the job, is that I do know people, I know neighborhoods, I know where to go to get things done, and people know where I am. And I think that has really made a big difference. I'd like to think so anyways.
I agree.
Yeah.
The last week you went to Sacramento. You went from Sacramento to Washington, D.C. That's called Cap to Cap, Capital to Capital. 350 people went?
I think so, yeah.
Why don't
it's a big group.
Talk about what the mission is and what you accomplished? And
I think, I mean, the benefit of Cap to Cap is that it is a great regional presence where you all go back and you hit the ground at the same time. And while there is some benefit going to our elected representatives there and lobbying for the things that we need, frankly, that's not the most important part of the trip. Frankly, I'd rather, if I'm going to engage John Garamendi, I'd rather engage him in his district office in Davis and let's talk about Davis issues. We can talk in Washington, but he's accessible here and we can get it done. But there is some real synergy for Davis going back there and interacting with the Rosevilles and the Sacramentos and even the Woodlands and West Sacramentos at that level. We were talking about rail relocation. We were talking about broadband. We were talking about sort of the SACOG region, as I talked about earlier. We go back, we show that we're united, we have documents that reflect, that we have a mutual interest. So when we go in to talk to staffer X and the committee on appropriations about broadband, they're not just seeing Davis. They're seeing a representative from West Sac. They're seeing a representative from SACOG. They're seeing just this representative of like, wow, well, this isn't just a Davis issue. And I think partly everybody comes back pretty energized by it. And I just think it's it's worth the time and the effort to send a staffer and a council member to be part of that delegation. So it was good.
When Ruth Asmunsen was on the city council, she was especially good at having good relations with the other people in SACOG. Mm-hmm. So much that in 2006, when the East 8th Street Shopping Center, what sometimes is called the Popsicles Shopping Center because of the paint job, we needed, I don't know, $100,000 in federal transportation money for a crosswalk. And Ruth was able, with a couple of phone calls, to get the decision made that they were going to have an emergency meeting and make the decision to approve the $100,000 just like that.
Right.
Now, Ruth spent years developing that relationship. Mm-hmm. That's what you get sitting on the plane going from Sacramento to D.C. with somebody who's a council member that you've never even heard of, and by the time you get there, you realize your kids are going to the same college, and you have all these things in common, and you become new best friends. And, hopefully, I mean, I was told that people spend several $1,000s during the week to go on it. So it's an investment that people make. But I think that the collegial dialogue is the most important part. Right. It's not just who went, but it's that you went together. Yeah.
I mean, and the cost issue, it actually is, if you were to go on your own, it would cost you much more than it would as if you go as part of this group. Sure. We, the City of Davis, don't have any lobbyists, so it's a good chance for us to connect. I mean, there's so much more that we could do if we wanted to spend the money on it. This is sort of a small way to do it, and it's when all's said and done, it's a drop in the bucket, I think, in terms of the benefit that we get from it. The results are not seen immediately, but if we do succeed in relocating the railroad out of Davis, if we do succeed in getting better, faster broadband in the city, 2, 3, 5, 10 years from now, the $5,000 that we spent to go to Washington, D.C., I mean, think about that. Think about the investment. I mean, it more than pays for itself, obviously.
So, what do you look forward to in the next year?
A point where I feel that that I'm really hitting my stride. And as I said earlier, I think I'm at a 6-month point right now. Every day is better. Fewer and fewer times do I find myself having to say, I don't know, I'll have to get back to you. And there will never be a day when I don't have to say that.
No. I hope you never get to the point where you don't have to say.
But as a manager, there's a level.
I understand what you're saying, but be open to new information.
Right. Oh, absolutely. But in this case, it's nice to be able to be, when someone asks you a question, to have the answer. Know you're familiar, to know how many employees you are, how big your budget is, to know everybody by name. Which is my goal. I mean, this is what I'm shooting for. So I would say over the next 6 months, over the next year, we have a budget to get through. We have labor negotiations. We have these innovation parks that we want to do. We have just no shortage of issues, but just these big ones. I see over the next 6 months working through those and just being able to look back with, I think, a real sense of satisfaction that we did it right, that we were trued by fire, that look at us. We're stronger, we're smarter, we're better for it, and so is the community. And I think I think we're headed that way. And so those are what I'm looking at. And Great. At the end, I think the evaluation is going to be very self-evident. It's going to be clear to everybody whether it worked or not, and whether I'm going to be here for 10 years or saying see you in 6 months. We'll find out.
Hopefully, you'll be here for 10 years.
Yeah, no, that's my goal.
Good.
That's my goal. That's what I'm shooting for.
Well, we need some stability and some long-term vision and some leadership.
Hopefully I'm the right guy at the right time. And, as I said, right now with this council, I think things are working out really well.
Good. I want to thank you for being on the show.
My pleasure. Anytime.
Good.
Thanks.
This is what's going on. Thanks for watching. Good evening.